The cable company that serves your neighborhood loses value on the stock market and the value of its cable drops. How come that makes your property tax bill go up? Hi, I'm Chad Booth. On today's County Seat, we're going to be talking about centrally assessed taxes. How do they affect you, and how does the appeal process help the counties keep your tax levy stable? Let's find out a little bit about the issue of centrally assessed taxes so you can understand how it works before we get into our conversation.
Locally assessed taxpayers are those taxpayers within a county boundary that the county assessor has no problem determining the value of that property. A centrally assessed taxpayer crosses county boundaries, and so it's not easy for one single assessor to assess their value. The centrally assessed taxpayers are assessed by the tax commission.
The valuation on your real property is assessed using market value, or what similar homes are selling for in your area. With centrally assessed properties like railroads, airports, and power plants, it's not quite that simple.
It's hard to determine just how much that property is worth, so they use these other methods that are more tied to how well the company is performing in a more nebulous way. That makes it more of an art than a science.
That art of determining the value of such properties is rather hard, because who can gauge what someone would pay for a railroad, for example? That fact often leads to companies disputing property tax claims as too high, which leads to further appeals. Now, while this may sound like a problem between the tax commission and the industry, this appeals process can actually have adverse effects on you.
The Utah Association of Counties noticed about years ago, decades ago, that these centrally assessed properties were seeing their values decrease over time or stay stagnant over time. And the result has been a property tax shift from centrally assessed to locally assessed. The counties are going to get the same amount of money no matter what, based on truth in taxation. The county's concern was that the centrally assessed taxpayers were shifting their burden onto the locally assessed taxpayers, your homeowners and small business owners.
Let's say a new mining operation starts in your county. That infrastructure and the value of that industry create new tax dollars that can be collected by local governments. This is called new growth. The idea being that as this new entity will require additional county services, such as roads, over time the value of that industry will fluctuate with depreciation and fluctuations in the value of the resources that are being mined. It is that change in the valuation that can cause the tax to shift back to local property owners, because the county budget remains the same. We'll discuss how counties are working to smooth out these fluctuations and keep the system fair and equitable for all taxpayers in a roundtable discussion. For the County Seat, I'm Terry Wood.
That's the nuts and bolts of how centrally assessed taxes work. There are certain side routes that are quite complicated, and we are going to wade into some of those and talk about the problems that counties face and look at solutions when we return with our panel on the County Seat.
What would you do with an extra day in Utah Valley? Explore the Wasatch Mountains? Snap a family photo at Bridal Veil Falls? Cool off on Utah Lake or the Provo River? No matter what you're searching for, you can find it in Utah Valley. Bring everyone together.
149 million years in the making, dinosaurs once roamed this land. Now they're found at the Dinosaur National Monument. Let's take you beyond the bones. We call it Dinosaur Land. You'll find it offers adventures and sights not seen anywhere else in the world. Come to Dinosaur Land, Vernal, Utah. You'll want to stay forever. The dinosaurs did.
Have you ever wanted to recreate the world around you? Add some excitement, culture, adventure? Well, there's no need to remake the world when that perfect combination already exists. Just remember 4 words. Welcome to Weber County. In Ogden, you'll find everything you're looking for, from the top of Powder Mountain to the restaurants of our revitalized downtown. Ogden, Utah. Mountain to metro and everything in between. Visit Ogden.com. If you're looking for gold at the end of the rainbow, you'll probably be disappointed, because in Piute County, the only thing you'll find at the end of a rainy day is the promise of adventure. Highway 89 is your access point through Marysville and the historic trails of Bouillon Canyon. Find yourself in the mountains one minute and the desert the next as you follow in the footsteps of the pioneers. Whitewater raft, fish, hike, all within a few minutes of a comfortable bed and a warm meal. Find out why the world has made Piute County its off-road destination. Piute County, the place where the rainbow ends.
Welcome back to the county seat. We are today discussing centrally assessed property taxes. This is an issue that's come up before, but there are some things that have recently changed with it, and there are some yet changes to come, and so we're going to try and work our conversation in that direction. Joining us today, Joshua Nielsen, who is a consultant for the Utah State Tax Commission.
Yes, it's great to be here.
And Lincoln Schertz from the Utah Association of Counties. I appreciate your taking the time to be here on this issue.
Absolutely.
I know that generally by the time you've prepped for a show like this, your head's ready to explode. So let's talk about, we've kind of come through the timeline of centrally assessed taxes. Now let's turn our direction to the appeals process, because inevitably a company is going to look at that tax bill, and if they can get their tax down a little bit, they're going to do that. How does that process start?
So the Tax Commission has their centrally assessed group, and they value properties during the months of March and April. At the end of April, they send out a notice to the taxpayer saying this is your notice of valuation, and the taxpayer then has 30 days to appeal their value. So they have, in essence, until the end of May to appeal the process, appeal their value, and let the Tax Commission and the counties that they're involved in know that they are appealing the value of their properties.
And importantly with that is the counties also have the opportunity to appeal a valuation as well. So when the Tax Commission sets the valuation, the counties make a determination if they think the valuation is appropriate as well. And so you have both the taxpayer as well as the counties operating somewhat on behalf of all taxpayers who look at that valuation to determine if it's appropriate. Both parties can appeal the valuation, and based on that appeal process, kind of works through and they establish what they think appropriate valuation will be.
Okay, so here's a question. If 3 years ago I would have gone to a county commissioner and talked to him about appealing a centrally assessed property tax, his eyes would have rolled backwards in his head and he would have fallen on the floor behind his desk. Why is that so difficult, and what's been working to change that?
Well, in terms of the appeal process, obviously it immediately involves attorneys and assessors coming in to establish what they think the appropriate valuation is. They have to make a legal case as to why they think the valuation is wrong or why the valuation needs to change. And in the taxpayer circumstance, they're either trying to say this is the appropriate valuation, or again, they're trying to work their valuation lower, saying that they're worth less so that they get taxed less. The reason county officials kind of have their eyes roll back in their head is the whole process of going through this, and then at the end, based on the valuation that's actually found, they have to do either what we would call a judgment levy to go and tax everyone else if the valuation of the centrally assessed property comes in lower than they anticipated. And if it comes in higher than anticipated, then they have to collect those taxes from that centrally assessed taxpayer. So very cumbersome process. Yes. At the end of the day, either the individual centrally assessed taxpayer is going to be upset, or you're going to have a judgment levy that has all other taxpayers essentially making up the difference from what was deducted from that taxpayer.
And it's a very long process. I mean, you have large centrally assessed taxpayers and very small taxpayers, and sometimes with the small taxpayers, the process can go very quickly and can be over by around the same time the Board of Equalization is done in the county, and it may not have much of effect. But with your large taxpayers, that process can get dragged out for 7-10 years sometimes, and when you do that, not only are they appealing that year, but now they're appealing every year after that. So sometimes those appeals have 5 years worth of value in them.
Okay, so my question is, what happens to the money? The county just doesn't get it in that appeal process time? I mean, you still have to send the cops out, and you still have to send the fire trucks out, and the garbage has got to be picked up, and the water's got to be treated.
The county and the entity will set their budget, and they will get the money, and the taxpayers still have to pay their taxes through those years. And then that's where it comes up in the end with the judgment levy, is that they have to pay that money back now. You know, if their value dropped and they need to get money back because they've been paying their taxes and they've been paying that increased value that they thought was too high, now in return they get money back.
So there have been times in the past where a centrally assessed taxpayer has had a smaller valuation than was originally anticipated, and we will be paying back taxes for a series of several years. The way we do that is we impose a judgment levy on all other taxpayers to make up the difference, which is why counties are so interested in this, is making sure that they are protecting all other taxpayers as well. So it's really no additional money per se to the county as much as it is a share of who pays locally and who pays at the centrally assessed level. And it's a closed system, so someone's going to end up paying. It's just a matter of who.
So quite frankly, if somebody, a large company that had a lot of rolling stock in a county, like a railroad or something, had gone through a long appeal process, that appeal process comes through, then at the tail end of all this, and they win the appeal, now you've got to turn around and hit the residents with a 40, 50, or 60% tax increase to pay back what's been paid by the others?
Potentially.
And this happened a couple years ago with the railroad, and that's something that
I
affects.
was just pulling that one out of the air, okay?
Yeah, and so, but with the railroad, because it impacts almost every county, I mean, several people decided to levy a judgment against their taxpayers. Now, just because you have to pay that back doesn't mean a county or a city doesn't have that money in the budget to go ahead and pay it back. But some of them don't, and it's so large that they need to do that judgment levy.
So in response to that, what the counties are looking at approaching the legislature this year on in the 2016 session is actually a process by which they can hold some of those funds in a restricted account for repayment in cases where they lose an appeal. Because right now we can only hold so much money in what we call reserves by state law. There are actually several folks looking at ways in which we could have a reserve account to keep this separate amount of money that would go towards paying back lost valuation appeals.
There was a bill passed last year that altered this whole appeal process and supposedly streamlined it. Can you help me understand that a little bit?
SB 165, if that's what you're referring to, made it so that the county, if there's an appeal that's done by a centrally assessed taxpayer, the county then has 30 days from that May 31st, so they have in essence until the end of June to join the appeal. And they feel that they want to be a part of the process because there's so much money involved. They want to get their attorneys involved and make sure that they have a say at the table on what's going on with the valuation.
Prior to that, where did they come into that appeal process, or were they even allowed in the appeal process?
They were allowed in the appeal process, but they had to actually file what they call a protective appeal. So instead of just joining an already existing appeal, they had to file a separate, what they call protective appeal. What this process does is really streamline and allow you to just join the existing appeal instead of filing your own appeal, which should save county resources and time in the process. But what we did on the opposite side of that is also said that counties can't initiate their own appeal unless they can show a pretty significant deviation from what they think the true valuation is. In fact, the number we picked was 50%. So if you thought your value was $100, we would have to show it was off by at least $50 in order to initiate an appeal, other than just join one that already exists.
Wow, that's still a fairly significant number.
It's a significant hurdle. There's no doubt
could
about
be
and sometimes by doing these appeals, by doing that, I think what they were trying to do is, it's a long, strenuous process that can cost a lot of money. And so with these counties trying just to appeal, it can be very, very costly. And by making sure that they are only making an appeal or joining an appeal when it's going to be worth their time and money to do so.
So I kind of want to tie this back into truth and taxation. I know we covered it in the story, but just to make it very clear, the counties are going to generate the same amount of money each year. If they're going to actually take in more money, they've got to go through a truth and taxation thing. So they get the same amount of money, and if your property value is a little bit less, then the tax rate goes up a little bit. So everything equals out. So it's a fixed amount of money on their budget.
It is a closed system. So if your taxes go down, it means someone else's have gone up, and vice versa. You got to think of it as a closed system where we guarantee the counties the same amount of money as they got last
There's
year.
always going to be 10 gallons of taxes in the
You've
pot
got
at
it.
any given time. Okay. We're going to take a quick break here from the county seat. We're going to come back and talk about things that need to be addressed going forward and how that might work at making this a better system. We'll be back at the county seat in just a minute.
There's a little place on a Utah map where I was raised, where my heart's at, where the sagebrush grows wild and high, and the stars come out at night. Oh, there ain't nothing like being raised in the basin with a Ute reservation, skiing starvation, that Duchesne County life.
Color, it's something that can be seen. But have you ever wanted to reach out and touch it? Experience it. In San Juan County, Utah, color comes to life like nowhere else on earth. Color can be more than an abstract. Color can be your gateway to a new world. Visit San Juan County and explore the past, present, and future in a way that you've only dreamed of. San Juan County. Color your experience.
In a place that is beyond words, there is nothing to be said except take your time in Bryce Canyon country.
Welcome back to the county seat. We're talking about centrally assessed taxes, a topic we've covered before. Always trying to move the ball down the field a little bit with this one because it is such a complex issue. So you've got this nice closed system, you've got this appeal process going, and everything's balancing out until the term new growth comes up, and then all of a sudden everything explodes. Would you guys explain new growth?
Yes. So new growth means different things depending on which system you're in. I think traditionally when we talk about new growth, most people think new growth is you built a new building or built a new home, and that's considered new growth. The way the current tax system works is you get, as taxing entities, counties, cities, school districts, you get the taxes you received last year plus new growth. So on locally assessed, which is your homes, that makes a lot of sense. You build a new home, that's considered new growth. The question, and where it gets a little bit tricky, is when you get into centrally assessed and personal property tax. So on the centrally assessed side, change in valuation is considered new growth. So a good example is Kennecott Copper in the copper mine. They could do no expansion of the copper mine, but the price of copper has gone up in the commodities market, and that change in price is considered new growth, even though there's been no expansion of the mine. So it's hard to translate that back to the locally assessed system where it's traditionally sticks and bricks, as they call it, but it is a very different system that's based primarily on valuation on the centrally assessed side as well.
Okay, so that makes the taxes, that makes everybody else's tax go down because there's new growth.
Correct.
So Kennecott pays more, people pay less.
Correct.
What happens if it tanks the next year? Now you have to go to truth and taxation. What do you do?
Well, if the value drops, they're still guaranteed the same amount of revenue. So therefore, the taxpayers now have to pay more to make up that extra amount that the centrally assessed property dropped.
Which in certain extent dovetails into the appeals process and why counties and taxing entities care so much about the appeals process. Because if that value change is significantly lower, then we know it's going to have a significant impact on our local taxpayers.
I was working with a county, without getting too specific, this last year where one of their centrally assessed properties, which is a big portion of their county, their value jumped up hundreds of millions of dollars. And so in essence, that's all new growth to them. And so now their budgets have increased quite significantly at the county and at the school district level. I mean, with the city and special districts, they get a little bit, but mainly with the school districts and the county. So now they have a decision to make. Do I take that new growth? Do I take all this money? Because that centrally assessed company did appeal. And it could take years and it could get drawn out. But if you're getting $1 million more in revenue that one day you might have to pay back.
But wait, if I'm listening to what Lincoln said, then that means they can't really put it all aside because there's a limit on how much you can put aside. So might they be forced to take some of it?
Or they lower the tax rate.
They lower the tax rate and take less.
So there's a different way in which they can do it. Very few, as you can imagine, very few taxing entities actually lower the tax rate. Most of them end up taking the money, which then gets into the question, how can we keep this money in the case there's an appeal that we have to come back and file? Very complicated system, tough for folks to understand, we know, but this is what your local assessors and county commissioners are struggling with every year to make sure that they're being fair to their taxpayers across the board.
I'm getting a dizzy spell just talking about it.
Well, usually when we're going through setting the tax rating process, we'll talk with the county auditor or the city, the person that's in charge of setting that rate, and they'll ask us questions of why are we getting so much money? And we've done a lot of research and we've tried to narrow it down, and we can try and tell them it's due to a reappraisal, it's due to personal property, or it's due to a specific centrally assessed property being increased, and try and make them aware that yes, this centrally assessed property went up and there's a possibility of an appeal, or they have appealed, and you need to be aware of that because that money might have to be paid back down the road.
And there's really two different types of systems that we need to look at, maybe we can talk about in the next segment, and that is there's a rate-based system that some states use, and then there's a revenue-based system that some states use. And based on which system you use kind of depends on which, what factors you're going to include into the tax base, and hopefully we can get into that into the next segment.
That sounds like they both are fraught with problems.
Absolutely. Both have problems, pros and cons on each side of it, for sure.
Okay, if you're just slightly lost on this, don't feel bad, but if you've got it, give yourself a gold star on the forehead. We will come back with the county seat. We will pick up with where we're headed forward, compare these two plans in the last couple of minutes we've got left, and basically talk about what's in store for the legislature to try and improve the situation. We will be back with the county seat in just a minute.
There is a place where looking out means looking in, where an impression lasting only a few seconds will be imprinted on a life forever, where courage is forged and innocence rediscovered, where remembering is rewarding and forgetting unforgettable. There is a place where truth is felt and where seeing is believing. There is a place.
It's one more, here we go again. I tell myself I'm not enough, but one more time is not enough. One last kiss and then you were gone, and I'm here wishing you could stay a little longer. Stay a little longer. Wishing you could stay a little longer.
The world is full of roads. Some lead you home after life throws you a curve. Some lead to a horizon as vast as your imagination, with adventure around every corner. Some lead to history and civic pride, where freedom is more than just a word. You'll find all these roads in Millard County, Utah. All you have to do is pick one. Millard County. Pick your adventure.
The Layton Hills Mall offers more than just shopping. Bring the whole family and enjoy SeaQuest Interactive Aquarium to feed the fish and exotic birds, hold live reptiles, and even swim with the stingrays. Or pump up the action and visit Dartside, Utah's premier soft foam dart tag arena. And don't forget the Great Room Escape, where you can challenge your friends to solving mysteries inside themed rooms. So come and experience great fun at the Layton Hills Mall and visit playindavis.com for other great activities.
Welcome back to the county seat. We are talking today about centrally assessed taxes. Lincoln, you said there are two systems. We are using primarily a revenue-based system, but there's a rate-based system.
Absolutely.
Explain that.
Okay, so I'll explain what we're working with currently. In the revenue-based system, as we've mentioned several times in the program, counties or taxing entities, school districts, etc., are guaranteed a certain amount of money, which means the rate has to float based on valuations of all properties within that system. So right now, where we're seeing home values significantly increase, the rate floats down as the values increase to give that constant amount of money. That's good when values are increasing. When values are decreasing, that can be bad. As your value goes down in your home, the rate has to go up to give you the same amount of money.
From an administrative point, the county can say, okay, I got X number of dollars to run the county on,
Absolutely.
or the school district,
It's a set amount that they know they can get every year.
Right.
So that's the benefit. They know they can provide essential services and they're going to have a guaranteed amount of money. So good things come out of that. That's the pro. On the revenue-based system, or excuse me, the rate-based system, it essentially means we're not going to guarantee you a certain amount of money, but we're going to guarantee you a constant rate. So as the value of your home goes up and down, it's going to be applied to the same rate. So when you're having huge economy upswings, you're going to pay more taxes as your value increases, but conversely, as values go down, you're going to pay less. However, that provides a lot of inconsistency in the system, doesn't give counties a stable amount of revenue to provide those services, and you as a taxpayer have less consistency in terms of what you're going to pay as well.
From a governmental agency side, if I were a prudent fiscal manager, I would want to do a revenue-based system because it would be constant. But you say that there are entities within the state that aren't doing that?
Well, they see the rate and they want to keep the rate the same every year. Now their revenue is not fluctuating dramatically by any means, but they see that and they think their taxpayers think they're getting a tax increase if the rate changes. But that's not necessarily true. It's only, you know, if you want to increase your revenue that you really are going through a truth in taxation process. Similar
to sales tax. If the price of bread goes up, we don't think we had a tax increase because you're paying more tax as a percentage of the cost of bread. It's a rate-based system. So from that standpoint, there are some entities that go, you know what, we're just going to keep the rate constant. Depending on what happens with your home valuation, it's going to be applied to that constant rate.
All right. Well, even with the change last year, as I talk to county administrators and elected officials, they still all are just, this is like a boondoggle to them. What's coming up in the new legislative session? What are we trying to fix this time around?
The new legislative session primarily is going to focus on new growth and defining what new growth actually means in all the different systems. As we mentioned, centrally assessed is largely value-based, whereas on locally assessed, it's based on new bricks and mortar coming into your community. There has been some discussion of changing how that looks and how we calculate new growth. So we'll see how that plays out in the legislative session. Additionally, we're going to have some conversation about this appeal process and allowing counties or taxing entities to keep some money in the bank in case they have to pay some of that back to avoid going through a judgment levy that will ding their taxpayers.
All right. Well, listen, mark this as a favorite on our YouTube channel. And we'll come back, Lincoln, if you'll rejoin us as we get into the legislative session so we can talk about this more in detail so people can understand what's coming down the pipe.
Absolutely.
I realize it's a little nebulous now. Thank you for joining us on the county seat. We appreciate you inviting us to your home. Remember, local government is where your life happens. Be part of the solution, get involved, and we'll see you next week on the county seat.